Have you ever heard something moving beneath your floorboards when you were supposed to be completely alone? What if the tapping you hear at night isn't your house settling, but someone living underneath you, watching, waiting? What if the road you drive every morning hides a car that never left? A car that belongs to someone who vanished into thin air? Or what if, out in the woods, a stranger stands just outside your tent breathing, silent until you call out, and he runs straight at you screaming? These are not urban legends. These are real stories. Things that happen to real people who wish they'd never gone looking for answers. Because sometimes, the moment you decide to check is the moment you invite the nightmare in. Welcome to Time's Midnight Nocturne Asterisk, where the shadows whisper and truth feels colder than fiction. If you're brave enough to listen, hit that subscribe button and step into the dark with us. Once you do, there's no turning back. It started just last week, during my final few days at home before going back to college. My parents had just moved into a smaller place, one of those quiet suburban houses that always looked harmless in daylight but somehow changed their face after dark. They'd mentioned a dozen times that the house didn't have a basement, only a narrow crawl space for pipes and wiring. I remember laughing about it. "Guess no monsters under the bed this time," I joked. I wish I hadn't. They left for a week-long vacation, and I had the house all to myself. The first night was fine, until around midnight, when I heard this slow, steady tapping coming from beneath my floor. It wasn't random, it had rhythm. 3 short taps, pause, then 2 louder ones. It sounded deliberate, like someone signaling. At first I thought it might be pipes, or maybe an animal, but it didn't stop. The tapping went on long enough to get under my skin, and no matter where I stood, it sounded like it was coming from directly beneath me. The idea that there was supposed to be nothing down there made the sound so much worse. Eventually, I convinced myself to ignore it, and somehow managed to fall asleep. The next day was quiet. For a while, I thought it was over. That night proved me wrong. Around the same time, the tapping came back louder, faster, and accompanied by a low scraping sound, the kind of dragging noise that makes your hair stand up because your brain knows it isn't mechanical. It's alive. I tried to tell myself it was a raccoon or something, but deep down, I knew no raccoon dragged metal against wood. By the third night, the sounds had evolved. The tapping turned into dragging, the dragging into what sounded like someone pulling heavy furniture across the ground. I remember gripping my phone, ready to call my dad, but stopped because I didn't even know what I would say. He'd just tell me it was the pipes again. So instead, I sat there, lights off, heart pounding, listening to whatever was moving beneath the house. It wasn't random anymore. It was pacing. The next morning, I finally told my parents over the phone. My dad said to check the crawl space, convinced it was some trapped animal. I didn't want to. Every instinct in me screamed not to, but I did it anyway. The entrance was under the porch, hidden behind old boards and cobwebs. I crouched down, flashlight shaking in my hand, and shined the beam inside. Dust, dirt, and nothing else. No animals, no movement. Just a faint, stale smell that made my throat burn. I backed out fast, trying to laugh it off, but my skin wouldn't stop crawling. Later that day, I decided to walk around the house, looking for signs of where an animal could have gotten in. That's when I noticed a stack of old lumber and tarps leaning against the far wall of the house. It looked like it had been there forever. When I pulled the boards aside, I froze. Hidden beneath all that junk, it was a rusted metal storm door, half painted over, almost like someone had tried to erase it from sight. My hands were shaking as I pulled it open. The hinges groaned, like something waking up after years of sleep. Below, a staircase disappeared into darkness. They told me there was no basement. I stood there for a long time before forcing myself to go down. The air grew colder with each step, thick and wet, carrying a smell that was part mildew, part rot, part something I can only describe as wrong. My flashlight beam flickered over old wooden beams, damp cement, and then trash, empty cans, torn food wrappers, an old blanket balled up in the corner. Someone had been living down there. I remember my stomach turning as I looked around and noticed something else carved into the wooden pillars. Symbols. Strange circular markings surrounded by tally scratches, dozens of them, all uneven, as if done with a knife or a nail, and drawings. They looked human, but distorted, stretched, wrong. Like something pretending to understand what a person looked like, but failing miserably. That was the moment I realized whoever had been staying here wasn't homeless. They were hiding. And I had just found their hiding place. I bolted up the stairs and into daylight, slamming the door shut so hard the frame shook. My hands were trembling as I called my parents again. My dad kept asking the same question over and over. "Are you sure there's no one still down there?" I told him I was sure, even though I wasn't. They promised to drive home immediately, but I knew that wouldn't be fast enough. I went to the hardware store and bought the heaviest padlock I could find. I locked that storm door from the outside, double-checked it twice, then tried to calm down. That night, I didn't even get the chance. At around 2 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of violent banging. Not from beneath me this time, but outside. The unmistakable sound of metal rattling. My stomach dropped as I realized what it was. Someone was trying to open the storm door. They were angry. The banging grew louder, faster, shaking the frame of the house. It sounded like fists, boots, metal tools I couldn't tell. I sat frozen on my bed, too terrified to even breathe. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Silence. I crept to the window, heart hammering so hard it hurt, and peered out. In the faint light of the porch lamp, I caught a glimpse of someone sprinting across the backyard and disappearing into the trees. I didn't see a face, only movement. Human, fast, deliberate. That's when I finally called the police. They showed up within minutes, searched the basement, the yard, everything. They found nothing, not even footprints. The officer told me it was probably just some local kids messing around, but I saw the look in his eyes. He didn't believe that any more than I did. My parents came home the next day. They promised everything would be fine now, that they'd deal with it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the person who lived down there wasn't done. That maybe, somehow, they had another way in. I left for college that same morning, trying to convince myself I'd never have to think about it again. But at night, when the house gets quiet, I still imagine that sound, 3 slow taps beneath the floorboards, and the thought that maybe someone is still counting. I grew up in a quiet corner of Montana, just a few miles from the Idaho border, where nothing ever seemed to change. The kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked, and everybody knows the same 2 radio stations. Because of that, when something strange does happen, it cuts through your routine like a blade. This particular memory has stayed with me for years, hovering at the back of my mind like a half-remembered nightmare. It began at the end of August, one of those liminal days when the summer sun still lingers, but the wind already smells like fall. I was driving my usual route to work along a narrow 2-lane highway that snaked between farmland and low-rolling hills. About 15 minutes out, I saw a car pulled off on the shoulder. It was an old light blue sedan, angled oddly toward the ditch. No hazards flashing, no driver in sight, nothing. Just sitting there like it had been dropped from the sky. I slowed down but kept driving. Around here, people break down all the time and walk off to the nearest farmhouse. I told myself it was no big deal. That evening, I drove the same road home. The car was still there, but now the driver's side door hung wide open. Something about the way it swung slightly in the breeze made my stomach knot. In the morning, it had been shut. Now it was open, like someone had left in a hurry and never returned. I craned my neck as I passed, but still saw no one, not even tracks in the dirt. This time, I didn't shrug it off. As soon as I had signal, I called the non-emergency line and reported it. The operator thanked me and said someone would check it out. I figured that would be the end of it. About a week later, I was eating breakfast when the local news mentioned a missing person case. They were vague about the details, but everything they described matched what I'd seen. An abandoned vehicle on a rural stretch of highway. A man from out of town who never reached his destination. They didn't release a name. They said there was no evidence of foul play. I turned up the volume, waiting for more, but that was all they gave. I tried to move on, but the curiosity clung to me. Not much happens out here, so when something does, it's like a rock dropped into a still pond, the ripples travel far. I called my brother Benjamin, a firefighter in a nearby town. I figured maybe he'd heard something from the sheriff's office. He had, sort of. A memo had gone around about the vehicle and the missing man. Beyond that, he didn't know much. I asked if the police were planning a search. He guessed they were. I'm not sure why I felt so compelled, but I pushed him. Maybe it was guilt for not stopping. Maybe it was just the unsettling image of that open door swinging in the breeze. Either way, I convinced him to help organize a search party. Within a few days, Benjamin had arranged for a small group, a handful of off-duty firefighters, a few officers, and me. The police welcomed the extra hands. We met on a cool morning near the stretch of highway where the car had been found. The terrain looked harmless from the road. Shallow woods, old irrigation ditches, low brush. But on foot, it was easy to see how someone could disappear out there. We split into pairs. Benjamin and I stuck together. For about an hour, it was nothing but dry grass brushing against our legs and the occasional flick of a grasshopper. Then, a voice crackled over the radio. One of the pairs had spotted something. We converged on their location. Through a gap in the brush stood an old maintenance shack I'd never noticed before, half sunken into the ground and smothered by weeds. From the road, it would have been invisible. Its door hung crooked, the lock snapped clean off. We hesitated at the threshold, the air inside stale and cool like a cellar. When my eyes adjusted, I realized it wasn't just empty. The floor was scattered with empty water bottles and food wrappers, not like trash left by teenagers, but like supplies someone had been using deliberately. The sense of being watched prickled the back of my neck. The group spread out to check corners, flashlights dancing across rotted boards. One of the firefighters called out from the far wall. We gathered around. In the lower corner of one board was a small, perfectly round hole. The edges were sharp and splintered outward. It wasn't rot. It wasn't an animal. It looked exactly like a bullet hole. We searched the shack inside and out, scanning for a shell casing, a slug, blood, anything. There was nothing. Just that single hole staring back at us like an eye. The officers radioed dispatch. Their voices had changed, tight and serious. This wasn't a routine missing person anymore. The lead officer pulled us together and thanked us, but told me, specifically, that I had to leave since I was a civilian. I felt dismissed but had no choice. Benjamin stayed behind with the others. Later that evening, when I called him, his answers were vague. He admitted that not long after I left, the firefighters were asked to leave too. The police had cleared the scene entirely. Over the following weeks, no new details emerged. Benjamin's contacts claimed they didn't know anything. The news never followed up. It was as if the whole case had been quietly erased. Eventually, I drove back on my own. I remembered exactly where the shack had been, or at least I thought I did. I followed the irrigation ditches, checked every patch of brush, but there was nothing. No shack. No sign it had ever been there. The terrain looked the same, but emptier somehow, like a stage after the props had been taken away. I tried a different section, then another, growing more unsettled with each passing hour. I kept expecting to see its roofline through the weeds, the snapped lock on the door, the bullet hole. Instead, only grass and silence. I stood there alone, the breeze moving through the scrub. Everything looked perfectly ordinary, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something vast and hidden. Either my memory had betrayed me, or something had happened after we left that day, something I wasn't meant to see. Maybe the county removed the shack. Maybe it was never there. But I know what I saw. I can still smell the stale air, still see that small hole in the wood, still feel the weight of the unasked questions pressing on my chest. Every year, when August fades and the first cold wind comes off the hills, I remember that morning, the light blue sedan, the missing man, the shack that vanished like a mirage, and I wonder what was really inside it before they shut us out. I wonder who, or what, I almost stumbled across in those quiet Montana woods, and I wonder if, somewhere out there, another door is hanging open, waiting for someone else to find it. Last August changed everything I thought I knew about camping. For most of my life, being in the woods was my escape, my way of hitting pause on everything loud and artificial about the world. My dad used to take my brother and me out there every summer when we were kids. Back then, the forest meant safety, quiet, and warmth. Now, it means something else entirely. That trip was supposed to be simple. 3 nights alone in a clearing I found on an old satellite map, far enough from any official campsite that I wouldn't hear other people or see their lights. Just solitude, pine trees, and silence. I told my girlfriend I'd be off grid for a few days. She hates camping, so she just rolled her eyes and told me to text when I got back. I packed my gear, downloaded the maps, and started hiking early in the morning. It took about 2 hours to reach the clearing, an open patch of soft dirt surrounded by tall pines. It was perfect. I pitched my tent, built a fire, and spent the evening watching the sun bleed out behind the trees. I remember thinking it was almost too quiet. The next day, I hiked to a nearby river I'd marked on the map. I wanted to fish for dinner, to make it feel like the old trips with my dad. I stayed there longer than planned, sitting by the water as the shadows grew longer. When I finally caught a trout, the light was already fading. I threw it in the cooler and started the hike back. The forest changed as the sun went down, the colors drained away, and every branch creaked like something breathing just out of sight. Within 20 minutes, it was dark. I turned on my headlamp and slowed down, careful with my footing. Then I saw it, a faint white light, far ahead, swaying side to side. At first, I thought it was another camper, maybe someone walking with a lantern. I actually felt relieved. I called out, "Hey there," trying to sound friendly. The light stopped moving. I waited for a reply, but none came. Then, the light shut off completely. The darkness that followed felt thicker somehow, heavier. A second later, I heard something crashing through the brush to my left, fast, violent, not coming toward me but moving across my path. The sound faded quickly, leaving nothing but my heartbeat in my ears. I stood there for a long minute before forcing myself to keep walking, telling myself it was just some animal startled by my voice. But that didn't explain the light. By the time I got back to camp, my nerves were frayed. I didn't bother cooking the fish. I ate some jerky, zipped myself into the tent, and tried to read until I fell asleep. I must have slept for a few hours because when I woke up, the moon was high and the forest was silver with light. I didn't know what woke me. Maybe a sound, maybe instinct. I lay still, listening. Nothing but crickets and the soft groan of the trees. I told myself to relax, but then nature called. I unzipped the tent slowly, trying not to make noise, and poked my head out. There was someone standing in the clearing, 15 feet away, motionless. A shape darker than the trees behind it, outlined in moonlight. I froze. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, facing my tent. My brain tried to make sense of it. Maybe a tree stump, a shadow, a trick of the light. But then I saw the slow, steady rise and fall of breathing. Whoever it was, they were alive. I whispered, "Who's there?" My voice sounded foreign in the stillness. The figure didn't answer. My pulse was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I reached for the switchblade I always kept near the tent flap. The second my hand touched it, the figure moved. It sprinted straight toward me. There was no warning, no build-up, just a blur of motion and a scream that didn't sound human. It was too high-pitched, too raw, like someone trying to imitate a scream without knowing how. I barely had time to crawl halfway out of the tent before it hit me. We rolled across the dirt, his weight crushing the air out of my lungs. I caught a glimpse of his face, pale, dirty, eyes wide and unfocused like an animal's. He didn't punch. He clawed. Long fingernails scraping at my cheeks, my neck, my chest. He was laughing and screaming at the same time. A horrible choking sound that felt like it was vibrating inside my skull. I got the knife between us and slashed blindly. He howled, not from pain, but from rage, and stumbled backward. The second he did, he turned and bolted into the trees, still making that awful noise. I sat there shaking, my hands covered in blood, unsure if it was his or mine. I wanted to run for the car right then, but the idea of hiking 2 hours through the woods in total darkness felt suicidal. So I did the only thing I could. I sat inside my tent, knife in hand, shaking and listening to every sound. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. Every crack of a branch made my stomach twist. That night lasted forever. When the first hint of dawn touched the sky, I was already packed. My gear was a mess, half of it torn, covered in dirt, but I didn't care. I hiked out fast, barely stopping to breathe. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me, to see that pale shape between the trees again. It never came, but the feeling never left. When I reached my car, I locked the doors and didn't stop driving until I hit the highway. I thought about calling the police. I even rehearsed what I'd say, but every version of it sounded ridiculous. Some guy attacked me in the woods where I was camping illegally. They tell me I was lucky it wasn't a bear. So I said nothing. I went home, showered until the water ran cold, and threw away my camping gear. For weeks after, I had nightmares. Not about the attack itself, but about that scream, the way it cut through the night, the way it didn't sound fully human. I started wondering who that man was, how he found me, and why he was there in the first place. Was he living out there like an animal? Was he watching me from the woods the whole time? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his silhouette standing, waiting, breathing. And the worst part? I'll never know if he was still out there, wandering between the trees, looking for another tent in the dark. I haven't gone camping since. I probably never will. Because once you've seen something like that, once you've heard that sound, the forest never feels empty again. Every crack of a branch, every shift of wind feels like a reminder that something might still be out there. Watching, waiting, listening for you to unzip your tent. Some stories don't end, they just wait for you to remember them. When I think about what happened to me, and what happened to others like me, I start to see a pattern. Different places, different people, but the same kind of terror, quiet, patient, buried right beneath the surface. It's almost like the world keeps its darkest things tucked away until someone accidentally lifts the lid. The first story began in a small suburban house, a normal home. A son left alone for a week, hearing sounds from beneath the floorboards. A tapping that turned into dragging, then screaming. He thought he was safe, that the worst thing he'd find would be a raccoon or a burst pipe. Instead, he found a hidden basement, markings carved into the wood, symbols that didn't belong to any sane mind. Someone had been living there, watching, listening, waiting for the right moment to return. When he locked that door, he thought it was over. But that night, something came back. It wanted in. The second story. It took place hundreds of miles away, down a lonely highway in Montana. A car left by the roadside, door hanging open, engine cold. A man saw it once, then twice, and knew something wasn't right. Days later, a search team stumbled upon a shack in the woods, a place that shouldn't have existed, yet did. Inside, signs of life, of someone hiding, surviving, maybe hunting. Then came the bullet hole. Clean, deliberate, and before anyone could ask the right questions, the shack was gone, vanished like fog. Maybe the land swallowed it. Maybe something else made sure it wouldn't be found again. And then there was the man in the woods, the one who thought solitude meant safety. He found out the hard way that sometimes being alone only makes you easier to find. The stranger who attacked him didn't come from the shadows by chance. He moved like someone who knew exactly where the tent would be, exactly when to strike. No flashlight, no hesitation, just rage. Screaming, clawing, human but not. The kind of madness that doesn't live in the city, it festers where no one's watching. When you line them up side by side, these stories start to echo each other. The hidden basement, the vanished shack, the man in the woods. 3 separate places, each with something living just out of sight. Something that doesn't want to be seen, but reacts violently when it is. You could call them coincidences. You could say they're just stories. But if that's true, why do they feel connected? Why do they all end with someone discovering a place that shouldn't exist, and someone else trying to keep it secret? Sometimes I wonder if we're not alone because of ghosts or monsters, but because of people who've gone too far into the dark and never found their way back. People who dig holes where there shouldn't be any. People who carve markings into walls and build homes underground. Maybe they find comfort in places that normal people avoid. Or maybe they're building something down there. Something that doesn't belong to us anymore. The thing is, these aren't just local legends. There are reports of hidden rooms found during renovations, sealed tunnels beneath small towns, and houses that somehow have spaces no blueprint ever showed. People whisper about it online. Stories about noises, about crawl spaces that go deeper than they should, about doors that appear where there weren't any before. It sounds impossible until you see it yourself. Until you hear it yourself. What happened in that basement could have happened anywhere. The tapping, the dragging, the figure outside the window, the banging on the door. It's all part of the same sound. The world underneath knocking, to remind us it's still there. What happened on that highway? An abandoned car? A shack? A bullet hole? It's a warning that sometimes when you look for answers, you'll find something that doesn't want to be found. And what happened in the woods? That's proof that there's no safe place left. Not in the house, not on the road, not even in the wilderness. Because every time we go looking for peace, the dark follows. It's not random, it's patient. It learns our patterns, waits for the right moment, and then it steps out just enough for us to notice. It wants us to look, to open the door, to walk down the stairs. And once we do, it's too late. Sometimes, late at night, I think about all three of them. The student, the driver, the camper. I imagine them lying awake, each in a different place, staring into the dark and realizing that something is staring back. Maybe they all stumbled across the same thing, just in different forms. Maybe the person in the basement, the one who lived beneath the house, moved on to the shack. Maybe the shack disappeared because he needed somewhere new to go. Maybe he ended up in the woods. Or maybe the truth is worse. Maybe there isn't just one of them. Maybe there are many. That's the part that keeps me up at night. The idea that somewhere out there, just out of sight, there are doors leading underground, shacks hidden in the brush, footprints that don't match any known shoe size. That maybe there's a network of them, people or things who thrive in the empty spaces beneath our world. They know we won't believe it until it's too late. So if you ever hear something moving under your floorboards, don't check. If you ever see a car sitting empty by the road, don't stop. And if you ever spot a light in the distance, swaying gently between the trees, don't call out. Because some things in this world don't want to be found. They've been here long before us. And they're still listening. What connects these stories isn't just fear. It's discovery. Each of them stumbled into something they were never meant to find. A hidden basement that shouldn't exist. A shack that vanished like a bad memory. A man who waited in the dark for someone foolish enough to speak first. The details change, but the message doesn't. Curiosity opens doors that were sealed for a reason. Maybe that's the real horror. Not ghosts, not monsters, but the moment we realize that something ancient and patient has been here all along, living just beneath the thin skin of our reality. It hides behind drywall, beneath foundations, deep within forests that don't show up on maps. And every once in a while, someone hears the tapping, someone sees the light, someone calls out and something answers. If you ever find yourself in their place, remember this. Fear is not your enemy. Denial is. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't go down into the basement because you just want to check. Don't walk toward the flickering light in the trees. Don't assume the strange sound outside is just the wind. Fear exists to keep you alive. Listen to it. If your house starts whispering, leave. If you find a door that shouldn't be there, don't open it. If you see a stranger standing motionless in the dark, don't talk, run. You owe yourself that much. Because once you acknowledge the thing staring back, once it knows you've seen it, you're already part of its story. And those stories never end well. In the end, what happened to them could happen to anyone. They weren't thrill seekers or ghost hunters. They were ordinary people who made one wrong choice. They looked closer. They asked questions.
Please.
They stayed just a little too long in the dark. And sometimes, that's all it takes to wake something up. So tonight, when you turn off the lights, take one last look around. Notice the shadows in the corners, the faint creak of the floorboards, the way the wind seems to pause for just a second too long. Somewhere out there, or maybe somewhere below, you're being listened to. And whatever's listening has all the time in the world. Stay alert. Stay alive. And if you want to keep exploring the darkness from a safe distance, stay here with us. Welcome back to Time's Midnight Nocturne Times, where we walk through the stories while others are too afraid to tell. Subscribe now, before the lights go out.